Welcome back, everybody. I hope you got to stretch your legs. It was slightly longer than a 5-minute break. You may have been able to tell that, but we just want to keep on schedule. So, allow me to introduce our first panel discussion today. This will be on the topic of healthcare. It will be led by our moderator, Dr. Robert Wack, MD. Dr. Wack is a Chief Medical Information Officer at Frederick Regional Health System. He is a board president at Magic and a lead researcher at Healthy Smart Home. He's an experienced leader of transformation and new program innovation for startups to large organizations, created a new healthcare services program, has developed innovative model for public-private partnerships in municipal broadband projects, as well as other emerging best practices for public sector telecommunications, and co-founded 2 successful nonprofits, including our partner today, Magic. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Robert Wack and his panel.
Thank you, Graham. This is going to be a really interesting panel. We've got a lot of experience, and many of the things that we're going to be talking about dovetail nicely with what Ron was discussing in the keynote speech. So let's get right to it. I want to introduce our panelists. Jackie Rice is a vice president and CIO for Frederick Regional Health System and has extensive experience in the hospital and healthcare industry. Frederick Health Information Services Department supports all hospital operations, ancillary services, as well as an extensive network of community physician practices, all of which are protected by a robust cybersecurity program. Catherine Whitmore is the CEO of Strategic Technology Solutions and is a nationally recognized thought leader in healthcare analytics and author of a unique enterprise business intelligence strategy and implementation model that creates the foundation for building cultures of accountability and performance management excellence. Her experience includes roles with tech startups and technology leadership positions within a variety of health systems. She also serves as a board member on the Health Information Exchange Policy Board for the Maryland Healthcare Commission, responsible for shaping health information exchange policy in Maryland. Brian Bolton is an attorney with Funk & Bolton with over 30 years of complex civil litigation experience, including serving as lead trial counsel in multiple jury and bench trials in federal and state court. Brian represents and advises employers, insurers, corporations, welfare plans, retirement plans, broker-dealers, financial professionals, and individuals. He provides counsel in a wide array of matters, including ERISA actions, fiduciary advice, plan design, contract disputes, employment disputes, intellectual property, regulatory proceedings, arbitration, and other complex litigation, such as cybersecurity issues. Thank you all for making time to join us today. And as you heard earlier, the thesis of this conference is the business risks associated with cybersecurity, particularly legal, financial, and insurance issues, and healthcare being on the front line, as we well know recently, of cybersecurity, touches on all of those issues. So before we dive into some of the deeper questions, I'd like to give you guys a couple minutes to just further elaborate on your profiles and your experience, and then we'll get into some discussion points. Jackie, would you like to go first?
Sure, I'd be happy to. This is a great discussion topic, and I enjoyed Ron's talk. As a healthcare organization, we are continually on alert with our cybersecurity, and we talk about finance and those kinds of things, but I come from a nursing background, so I always go to patient safety. I don't want to be the person getting a cardiac cath when the systems go down. I don't want to have to turn our patients away because our system is down and they die in transport. These things have happened at other organizations, and it's a very real decision point when we're talking about what all can we do. The other thing is it's all about having the tools and the resources. And in healthcare, we're competing with having nurses on the front line and providers on the front line versus having people taking care of the security system. They're all important, but you have to make decisions of what is your risk acceptance and what risk are you going to mitigate out there. So that's usually where I come from when I'm starting to think about these things.
Outstanding. Thank you. Catherine?
Thanks, Dr. Wack. So excited to be here today and participate. This is an amazing subject for sure. As someone who started out in Department of Defense as a software engineer and migrated her way into IT leadership roles in healthcare, working with data as an asset. Data is at the heart of all of my work, now even in my consulting. And the data in and of itself is something that is such a high value in healthcare. Cybersecurity is such a key. It's not just a technology subject. Data is not just a technology subject. It's a business subject. Right now on the open market, right, black market, a healthcare medical record is worth, depending on which source you look at, anywhere from 50 to 100 times what we do see for credit card information and financial information. So my work with data and healthcare CIOs around the country is underscored by most of them saying, similar to what Jackie just mentioned, that it is really not if a cyber attack of sorts will occur, but it's perhaps when. And I have some unique experiences working in an IT executive interim role with a large health system that unfortunately went through a malware penetration. And I spent a lot of time in the restoration building blocks to bring that back online. So I'm happy to share any and all of those experiences with the group if they would like.
Outstanding. Thank you. And Brian?
Thanks, and good morning, everyone. I come at this from obviously a legal perspective in the sense that I advise clients, and including health insurers and self-funded health plans, ERISA plans, but I also come at it from a very practical business side because I'm the chairman of my law firm. We are a HIPAA business affiliate. We have business affiliate agreements. We have to manage a lot of health insurance and health care records. So every single day I worry about this, and it's an important consideration for us in terms of how we operate, and especially now in the COVID-19 world because we're all working remotely. So this is a very important issue for us, and it's very near and dear to me right now more than ever. So that gives you a little bit of my background.
All right, thank you. So the audience for this is much broader than just healthcare professionals and healthcare IT professionals. This is a problem that, as we all know, touches every single business, every single operation across our country. So I guess for starters, let's talk about, and if you all could just share some anecdotes, certainly without any specific information that might be sensitive, but anecdotes of cybersecurity problems that you've had, like similar to what Catherine mentioned, where there was some conflict between, there was some question about whose fault this was, and where did you go to figure out how you were going to solve this problem, and also what the financial costs were, and how did that get resolved? Was it through insurance? Was it through some sort of reserve? Did you just eat it? Those kinds of things, so that we can sort of lay out for non-healthcare people the common sort of elements of these problems, that this isn't just healthcare problems. These are business problems. Anybody want to go first?
This is Jackie. I can talk a little bit about, we've had a couple instances with some third-party software that had issues. We have a cybersecurity insurance policy, and I think everybody should look into that because this can have a huge impact on your business. So we utilize both our cybersecurity insurance group, who has their own cyber team that is experienced with dealing with this every day. So this isn't something you want to try to tackle on your own, figuring it out as you go. You need to be able to make decisions quickly and know what path you're going down very quickly. So between that and also our legal team, decisions were made, and some costs are recoverable, some are not. Some reputational kinds of costs are out there that you have to figure out. How are you working with your clients and your patients? And because you have to, in healthcare, in any business, you have to have that trust for somebody to trust you. And that's really what it's all about. So, marketing, your cyber teams and your legal teams, they all have to come together and work together.
Excellent, excellent. And on the insurance side, did you have any tools or resources to figure out what exactly kind of insurance, what levels of insurance, what sort of services? How did you go through that process?
Yeah, that has to rise up to a corporate decision. It really is a business decision. And again, it's all about risk, understanding your risk, what you're going to insure yourself for, and what services different cybersecurity insurance will give you. There are all kinds of things out there, and some of them have a team that will come in, they take over, they do this all the time. Some do not. So it's the cost, the services and, that they have, and also where's your level that you can take risk? What's your comfort level for that? And actually, as I'm doing software contracts all the time, and I'm sure you guys are doing contracts, and Bob can probably allude to, these are very important aspects of those contracts, of having this spelled out in there, of maybe having requiring the people you're dealing with to have a certain level of insurance. We're seeing that in a lot of contracts now, and we look for that as well.
Yes, exactly. So, Catherine, you're a consultant, a contractor. When you are bidding for work, or you're, in the early stages of dealing with a client, how do you navigate those issues? If a client says, "Well, what about your cybersecurity policy, or what sort of coverage do you have?" How do you navigate that?
Yeah. So that is, obviously there's always been a number of assurances, contractual relationships around confidentiality, security, and now, the insurance factor is on the rise. We basically need to have an analogous set of protection. If we needed to have some of the legal issues roll down to us, we want to protect ourselves and be able to protect the client. I will certainly say, dovetailing with what Jackie said, about 4 or 5 years ago in the healthcare industry is when we first started seeing all these hospital ransomware pop up in the news media. A lot of bad actors out there realized that the healthcare industry was operating as an industry focusing finite, limited resources on clinical work and patient care, and not spending investments like financial services perhaps maybe did in robust cybersecurity solutions. So we were a little bit behind the curve on that. And unfortunately, bad actors did realize that. The scenario that I shared with a very large 10 plus hospital health system was in the 2016 timeframe when that occurred. And to tie back to the insurance subject, that is when many organizations did not yet have their cybersecurity in place. In fact, it got me at the table really beginning to understand the need for it, the different components of it. And I'm sure our legal expert will probably share some more of the details on that in a bit. But I will certainly say at that time, the cost, to Jackie's point as well, there was a little bit of insurance at play in that particular organization. Make no mistake, now they have a very robust set of assurances in place. But to navigate those waters, it's really important to leverage whatever partners you would have at play. And we enlisted, obviously, the FBI and a number of the federal agencies now that do work in concert on these types of efforts. We also engaged a vendor partner that was a very specific security partner, as well as an insurance company, etc. And within a 48-hour window, it was one of the most dramatic business responses I've ever seen. Healthcare is very well prepared for emergencies and the ability to divert, if you will, patients, our customers, consumers, to other locations. So some of those tactics are available and were easy to enlist. But that first sort of 48 hours before it was recognized what occurred, your simplest things, communicating, email, you can no longer have the lowest level of communication, never mind a scheduling system, which is needed to schedule an operating room, a physician, the equipment to be present to conduct any level of a procedure. So that particular instance, I will share that many of those partners worked together, but that 48-hour window was really a little crazy, fair to say. But within that window, there were media communications, public relations to the point of trust and community. There was a shutdown of all systems, all clinical systems, to be able, financial and otherwise, right, to be able to stop the threat, because you don't know initially exactly what it is till security partner, sort of help. So, 48 hours in is when things started to build again. And it's a much longer story and trajectory of prioritizing then which system comes back online first. Obviously, communications, clinical and scheduling types of things, kind of came back first. But if it were not for those partners at that time, I think that 48-hour window would have been much different. And I also think, roll the clock forward now 4 years, and this is a client I do still work with, they have a lot more robust preparedness from an insurance perspective, from additional partners, and quite frankly, like all healthcare organizations, from technology investments and security investments, protocols, security executives, et cetera, to really lead those efforts.
Excellent, thank you. Brian, a good story about a complicated, messy cybersecurity case.
There's lots of them. I mean, what Catherine said is so accurate. I mean, I think the healthcare industry was really not prepared for the onslaught of the cybersecurity attacks that they experienced. And they've really, in the last, I guess, 3 to 4 years, roughly, really geared up their protections. And there was a time when, and I'm not going to mention names, but almost weekly we were getting notices that some other health insurance company was hacked. I mean, it was almost weekly. I mean, that's how bad it was. I mean, just to give you a sense of, for a while there. I mean, so if you were on the inside of the industry, it was every week some major health insurer, often national in reach, was being cyber attacked and their records were stolen. And just as Catherine said, they are valuable in the black market. And I'm not certain I understand all the reasons why they are so valuable, but they are. And I think it's much different now. And you've really seen a tremendous evolution in a very short period of time. I mean, what's interesting is that, going back 4 years, again, we're a business affiliate, the requirements 4 or 5 years ago were not that onerous on us. And now you get, a list of like 5 or 6 pages of, you have to meet all these technical requirements, and you have to have cyber insurance on top of all that. But literally, the technical requirements that are now imposed, if you work with the health insurance industry, if you're a business affiliate, very, very onerous, very technical. And you really have to have essentially a state-of-the-art system in place in order to function within that universe anymore. And if you don't, then you're not going to be a business affiliate anymore. And it's really just that simple from the health insurance industry perspective, because, every day, if you think about it differently, I'm interfacing with, in-house lawyers, in-house, care systems, and sometimes they want to communicate with me about medical matters that are going on, and they're trying to communicate with me. And so we have to have secure platforms. Everything has to be secured. I mean, you can't just attach things to emails. That used to happen. I mean, that literally, go back 5 years, I'm telling you, that happened. It doesn't happen anymore, but it did. And they were not secured. They were not protected. I just got an email, and, there were patient records attached. That doesn't happen anymore. That's not the way the world works anymore, but it was. And
Surprised.
I hope it doesn't. Let's put it that way. I don't get them anymore, at least this on my side. So that gives you some sense of where we are today versus really just as recently as 3 or 4 years ago. So we've come a long way in a short period of time from the health insurance perspective.
Well, that leads nicely into the next question I have, which is, as you mentioned, the whole sort of the healthcare industry, the healthcare business is really just a big data collection exercise about people's health issues. That data comes in, it's used by the health providers, physicians, nurses, all the systems inside a health system. And then people are paid for that, so that there's reimbursements for these activities, and it goes through the insurance companies. So there's all these people who are handling both data and money. And that is not unique to healthcare. That's most businesses in the 21st century basically go through the same exercise. You collect, a customer order or something, or you're providing some service for a customer, and then you're compensated for that. And maybe there's a third party handling the money. So, Brian, if you could tell us about a situation where you were involved in trying to resolve a conflict where a vendor or a contractor who played some role in the collection and handling of information was compromised, and then it resulted in a financial loss to one of the parties, and then you had to figure out who's getting compensated for that. Is it coming from the insurance policy? Is it coming from litigation, a penalty, or is it a sanction from a regulatory body? How do those things get resolved? If you have any thoughts about that.
It can be any number of those situations. Truthfully, it can be, and I can give you an example, not healthcare, but it's closely related. Also, what I do is ERISA work, the 401k plans, and now they're focused on more and more, cybersecurity because of cyber theft of the money on deposit in 401k plans. And so this issue just came up recently where, so the money stolen from the 401k plan, and they sued the third party vendor who's actually managing the money and got supposedly the secure platform, and they've been hacked into. And the third party vendor turns around and sues the employer and says, well, the real reason this happened is because of your lax security systems on the front side. And so you have, right, exactly. You have everybody pointing fingers at everybody. You've got, the Department of Labor, they're sort of sitting on this, not fully invested yet, not issuing clear guidance. So you don't have a situation where you have this, clear government guidance. So you don't have, if you do A, B, C, and D, then you've taken the right steps. So you don't have that. So it's really getting litigated right now. And that's a lot of what you see, because and this is true in health insurance too. I mean, it's not like you can say, if I follow this standard and I do these 5 things, I'm bulletproof, I'm safe. There is no such thing. So what happens invariably almost is you end up in these very difficult litigation situations with, and again, I hate to say this, but you can hire an expert to say almost anything. And some expert can always say whatever security system you had isn't good enough, whatever good enough means. And therefore, off to the litigation universe you go. And so it's very difficult to ever resolve these cases without, really spending a ton of money, which is why you see them settling so often, because there's essentially no end in sight. And that's what we constantly see is, as long as you can find an expert on one side, you can find an expert on the other side. And there's just no clear resolution or clear guidance that we can say, again, do these 5 things and you're safe. I wish I could tell clients that, but I can't. And that's very frustrating for both me and my clients. So I understand it, and it's very frustrating. Believe me, it's very frustrating.
I can imagine. Jackie, so in the healthcare world, we rely on vendors to provide all sorts of services, for example, documentation and electronic medical records. When that goes wrong and it affects revenue because you can't bill for what you don't document, what recourse does a health system have, or the business that gets affected that way?
Well, again, you go back to your agreements. That contract is the binding agreement. So what is in the contract for responsibilities and mitigation? So, this had happened with, we've had a couple of cloud-based, actually, old school, we always kept everything behind our own firewall. And I still like that, I have to admit. But most everything is in the cloud nowadays. So you're very much dependent on others. And that's why we're very careful with the contracting, looking at what are their responsibilities, what are our responsibilities. But ultimately, that trust factor with your end users is always going to come back to you. The finance piece, you can find some. If the contract is well written, you can do some recovery, depending on what that contract looks like. That's usually a long, drawn out procedure. And you try to make that for your customer as painless as possible because you're already looking at trust issues and those kinds of things as far as that goes. So, usually there are 3 phases to this that I look at cybersecurity as far as that goes. One is your attack prevention, which we are all doing as best we can with all of the tools. Another is your attack response when it happens. How do you mitigate those losses? How do you, like Catherine said, how do you shut down things immediately? And then attack recovery. And that actually attack recovery is often dependent on our end user people and all the business units. They must have a plan. How are you going to function if in healthcare, when systems go down, the average amount of time for total recovery is at least 2 weeks? Okay. What are you doing? What are your downtime procedures? How are you collecting? If you have patients, if you have clients and you're outpatient, how are you collecting that data so you can recover financially on the back end? If you don't have that, you won't even be able to go out and recover it elsewhere. So those attack recovery plans, downtime plans, whatever you want to call it, for anybody who has a business are essential. You should plan for this may happen. This is what I'm going to do at the time, because I tell everybody I'm shutting things down till I figure it out. That's what's going to happen. What are you going to do? We've taken care of patients. We've taken care of patients long before we had technology. We can care for them, but you have to have a plan, a collaborative plan to do that, to collect all that. And especially the finance piece. A lot of people miss that piece. How are you going to collect that? You can't recover if you don't have that information.
Excellent. Catherine, any?
Yeah, I think, Jackie's points are very well taken. As a healthcare CIO, you must plan for when this will occur. You don't want it to, but it's highly likely. And so the vendor partner component that she talked about and having very strict contracts on that side is really key. I also think it's driving a little bit more of a strategy around self-sufficiency on the recover and restore part. As Jackie mentioned, we've always had downtime procedures, but the intent and our wildest dreams was that a legitimate software bug or glitch would occur, right? We never envisioned that these were bad actors trying to harm, steal, etc. And so things as simple as, and actually the example that I shared with you, the reason why there was a reasonable road to restoring there were succinct backups of almost all systems kept secured off the network so that as the outside penetration was stopped, the systems were shut down, penetration was stopped, but it certainly could not have made its way over to backups in general. And a couple of the hospitals that have been in the news in the last 3-4 years, the one real example that's been very publicly documented is California-based hospital that was a very small hospital. They did not have backups to be able to rely on. And this was a ransomware attack. And if you've ever seen that, literally up on the screen of every computer on the network appears the, click here to pay us your Bitcoin, and it gives you the dollar amount. And that particular hospital actually paid $17,000 worth of Bitcoin to be able to get their systems back. Now, my experience in working with the FBI is they say, do not pay the bad actors. We are, in fact, just rewarding them. And that is perhaps why we saw a little bit of that 4 or 5 years ago flurry that is, I think, a little lesser now, as Brian mentioned as well, based on the fact that we are thinking a little bit more, unfortunately, towards the bad actor and being able to have good procedures and ability to operate in a downtime mode, both the patient and the finances, as Jackie mentioned, but then the ability to really restore from our own set of systems. You may miss a period of time that you need to resurrect, but at least you can be back up and running in the fastest period using that strategy.
Great. So Catherine, I'm going to start with you this time. Ron mentioned in his talk something that I actually hadn't really thought of, is the impact that COVID is having on cybersecurity, the industry in general, and just specific practices. So just kind of following on that theme, any specific things that other than, well, maybe not other than, maybe because of the virtualization of everything, like this conference, any impacts that you've seen, from a security perspective that is either resulting from or related to the COVID pandemic?
Yeah, most healthcare organizations had online presence to some degree with patient portal software and the ability for a patient, a consumer, to interact with their electronic health record data just a little bit. Many of them were putting their big toe into telemedicine services and the opportunity for you to actually see your doctor and speak to a provider, in that vein as well. Certainly when COVID hit, most organizations did a 180 pivot to be able to protect their staff, their patients, et cetera, and be able to offer a rapid acceleration of telemedicine services. There was also a mention that some of the HIPAA kinds of regs were relaxed a little bit. I've not seen too much negative bad actor in the mix. Now, we've not seen that. Personally, I've not seen that in my consulting work. We've not heard that in the press yet. I actually think it remains to be seen based on the fact that we are still right in the thick of all things COVID and what it's doing to our industry. I don't want to plant any seeds for anyone, but I would be surprised if we don't see a little bit more risk simply based on the fact that we've opened up a lot more electronic services, digitized services to patients that way. And I think it's all good. Back to the 3 tools that Jackie made mention of, we simply need to know how to well protect ourselves with partners that help provide those kind of telemedicine, telehealth services, and also be able to know how to do the same kind of restoration and recovery if there were a particular challenge in the future.
All right. Brian, any thoughts on COVID impacting cybersecurity?
Yes, I would say definitely. I mean, I think one of the interesting things I've seen is in picking up what Catherine said about telemedicine and about even my communications, because obviously I've got attorney-client privilege issues that relate to medical issues, that relate to medical records. So you have like this whole convergence, almost a perfect storm of all this protected information in the communications. And what's interesting is to see the clients migrating to secure telehealth and teleplatforms that are essentially, I would say, without naming names, more secure than Zoom, let's say. And so that's where they are. I mean, and that's the reality. And I think they have to be. I mean, because, it is, Zoom has been shown not to be, quote unquote, the most secure platform. And so from a technical perspective, if you're out there and you're in the healthcare space, you have to consider that. You don't have to like it. You don't have to agree with it, but you have to think about it and think about, okay, if we're going to permit telemedicine or we're going to permit, our in-house lawyers to communicate with outside counsel, and they're going to talk about medical records, and they're going to talk about providers, and they're going to talk about privileged information. How are we going to protect that? And you can see it even in the platforms they're choosing to use. So yes, it very much is in their minds, and you can already see it in operations.
And Dr. Wack, I would love to respond to that. And I know this is going to cue up Jackie to make a response as well. It's interesting to note that there are several electronic health records vendors that, by the way, do use third-party teleconferencing software, Zoom being one of them, in their actual products. Now, that said, obviously, there are enterprise versions of Zoom that have a little more security and rigor in them in the defense of those electronic health record software vendors. But I do think that this brings up a really good point of what vendor are you using for telemedicine? How do they integrate with your electronic health record vendor? Where does that expertise come from? And if you're a CIO in healthcare, how do you get comfortable with opening more of the digital front door for more services to your patients? What do you think, Jackie?
Well, thank you for that introduction. Actually, COVID affected us a good deal. To Catherine's point, the telehealth for patients, we made some strategic decisions, and you have to make those quickly. And one was, what are we going to allow and what aren't we going to allow? Those decisions were made fairly quickly because there are some, we have over 100 providers that we're supporting. So how do you get them up to speed if they weren't using this before? How do you support the patients? How do you support the 70-year-old out there who has never gotten on to do this? Can you make it also available for their family members to help them and do those kinds of things? So this was a stretch. I'm very proud to say I think that the healthcare handled it very, very well. We decided what we were going to use, and it wasn't Zoom. Thanks, Bob. And yes, they did have some issues. And also, we had to get some apps. You have to have different venues for the patients to get on. So thankfully, we already had an application that was an app on a phone for secure communication between our providers back and forth. And they quickly came out. I mean, the vendors really responded. They quickly came out with a solution for using that same secure app that somebody could use on their phone to talk to patients. So as the healthcare industry, I think, responded amazingly well. That actually goes back, I'll talk to a few other things, but that actually goes back to what Ron was talking about the tribal knowledge. And I believe this, that COVID has brought us all together in a way that it hasn't before, even for cybersecurity, even for all of these issues, the collaboration out there, making sure that we are all taking care of each other is great. And it's a really good thing because we don't want to be an entity to ourselves. We want to learn what happened, what worked really well for you. I think in healthcare, in years past, it often was, we're in competition with you. I'm in competition with this hospital here and this hospital. And I really feel like the collaboration is coming together much, much better. And I know in business, you all are out there, doing your own business kinds of things, but the collaboration on some of these things are very important. Another thing that I'll talk about that COVID was that we had to respond very quickly to and understand is materials management and supply for equipment, for masks and gowns and gloves. And I'm sure you've all heard of that in the news. That is something we had to respond to quickly. We were working very quickly to develop new reports to show where we were and how many days on hand we have. There's so much reporting that had to be done to the state and still does for COVID testing and all of those definitions. Data governance is very important here. what are those definitions? We're getting information in from all kinds, all over the states. What is the definition that you're reporting on, that I'm reporting on? And is it the same? And who's putting all that data together? So, I think it has brought data governance to the forefront for the importance of that data that's out there. So, materials management, and even from the ways of, okay, I'm sending more people home to work, kids are going home, everybody's going home. Try to get some laptops in real quick because you need to set up a second ICU. It was very challenging. It's a little bit better right now, but I won't be surprised if it becomes challenging again. And some of that came from, we're dependent on China for a lot of those electronics. And when they were having their issues, we were having issues getting equipment in. So depending on your business and where there is an issue with COVID may depend on what materials you have to worry about getting in. So we all know the toilet paper situation, right? So, I mean, those are the things you need to think about as far as that goes. And then sending a lot of people home to work in the healthcare. Most of us came to work every day, but who could we send home to lessen when your governor says, send as many people home as you can to keep the distance and to keep everybody safe. You have to figure out that is a security risk when you're sending people home. I can much better control that when they are here under my network, and I can control that. When I'm sending them home, I have to figure a secure way to send them in. I didn't have enough equipment to send everybody home. We were sending home right away. So I couldn't say, you have to take our equipment, you have to do this. I had to, depend on other avenues for, this is the only way you're going to work from home. If you can't do this, you'll have to come in, but you can come in this way because I know this is secure. And you can't print it home because I don't have access over that. You have to decide, what are your rules and what are you going to do about that? Those people being at home doing those kinds of things. So that was a lot, so I'll stop. But there were a lot of things that were affected by COVID and still are today.
That's all great stuff, and it cues up nicely. I couldn't have scripted this better myself. The last question, which I we'll try to squeeze in here in our remaining time, because it's a big meaty subject, and it segues into our next keynote speaker's topic, which is we've talked a lot about data governance here and the security of the data. But there's also sort of a stewardship and ownership issue around this. In healthcare, we produce data, but we also are the custodians of data. But we're also consumers of data, and lots of businesses are in one or several of those roles. And in healthcare, we have to juggle conflicting claims on that data. The insurers want access to people's data. The patients obviously want access to their own data, but then the health system needs access to that data and needs to sort of protect and control that data because that's the basis of everything we do. So with that in mind, any thoughts about just how your role from each of your perspectives, what it's like today and how you think it might evolve, and challenges that you've experienced balancing those conflicting claims on that data and how it affects how you do your job?
Well, I can lead off, and I'll do a short one, in that I struggle with this every day. For the government wanting the data, everybody wants the data, and I worry about their security. Even our government, we know they've been attacked. Our third-party billing systems that take all of our data and need to look at it, they want to get in there to make sure they get all the billing information that they need. So I struggle with that on a daily basis. Again, try to have the strong contracts. I think your contracts are the bottom line to many of this, but it's also, sometimes I have a gut feeling about things, and I always trust that. The other thing that I will mention is de-identified data, and people who are third-party systems, they want to They say they want to de-identify all your data and keep it. So we struggle about that. Because I believe in 3 years from now or 5 years from now that information will not be de-identified, and our end users and patients are trusting us with that data. If I send it out there, I really truly believe it won't be de-identified in a number of years because of the technologies out there. And what could that be utilized for? I think it's an unknown, but could it be? So, and some contractors will just say, I use that de-identified data to help computer systems make very much better decisions. And I'll use X-rays as an example, that they can make great decisions getting all this data and teaching the computer what to look for. But can they take somebody's head X-ray and figure out how to put their face to it and identify them? Probably they can. So we worry about those kinds of things. We make the best decisions that we can. We have the best contracts that we have out there, but it is something we are dealing with every day.
Catherine?
Yes, I will certainly say, and I'll go back to the mention of the cost on the dark web of a medical record. And Brian earlier said, gosh, don't know why it's worth so much. When an electronic medical record contains a lot of patient demographic data, date of birth, oftentimes even a credit card number, et cetera. So the components of data in there, never mind the actual health information itself, test results, et cetera, that information is very high value for all kinds of fraud and theft on the web. And I do think that it creates a much larger challenge for us in the long term. I certainly think that, to Jackie's point, sort of stay tuned. There's lots more to come as we go. It's a risk mitigation balance. I certainly think that we do need to do a much better job of our strategy. Our collaboration was mentioned earlier. Our industry is changing. It's reinventing itself to have the synergy of partnerships to help us really carry that forward. And I could go on for a long time on this, subject too. I'll leave one last thought, and I'm sure that Brian wants to chime in as well. But, we talk about how we're counting and measuring and governing this data. We do have to rely on HIPAA. There are some fundamentals of HIPAA that will allow us to carry forward sort of the stewardship appropriately of data. I do think, to Jackie's point as well, even today, some of the birth date data and other public domain data points can be used with some machine learning algorithms, some artificial intelligence to today cobble together de-identified information and identify it. So that is a real threat today, and it will become a real threat for the future. I'd like to tie this back to some of Ron's comments too, and perhaps what Brian may touch on as well, and that is some of the other legal remedies and provisions, and hopefully some additional legislation in the future at a federal level, standards, regulation, et cetera, that can maybe help us on that journey. But it definitely is something we do need to work together on to keep that data safe and preserved for the essence of our patient, right? Our customer, our consumers. And that, by the way, is every one of us, not just those of us that work as leaders in that industry.
Great. Brian?
Yeah, I'll be short because I know we're short on time. I think one of the things you're going to see in the future, because it just has to happen, I think is a pragmatic matter, is data sharing very directly between hospitals, healthcare providers, and the health insurers in a very direct, real-time sense, with artificial intelligence, AI getting involved as well. That is going to be the future. I know everybody hasn't worked all of the logistics out, and I'm certain the platforms are not all in place, but I am 100% certain in the next few years, you're going to see an increasing push in that direction, because it's going to ultimately drive down the cost from everybody's perspective. So everyone's going to have a financial incentive. There's going to be a lot of upstart, but ultimately it's going to drive the cost of the healthcare system down and make the system more efficient. So I think that's coming, like it or not.
Yeah, I would just say I totally agree. Bob, it is happening right now with many of ours. The problem is identifying when somebody leaves and one of those payers and goes somewhere else, and the devil's in the details. So I think a lot of work in the next couple of years, but totally agree.
All right, we've got some questions. Before we get to those, I'm just going to summarize real quickly. I've been taking notes here. This has been an outstanding conversation. First is, well, I guess the biggest point is, as people have probably heard, that we don't have a lot of solutions. We still have a lot of questions. It's very complicated, but things are evolving very quickly and solutions are coming. Number one, COVID uncovered a lot of interesting vulnerabilities in our systems and processes that we're adapting to. Two, contracts are very, very important. Read your contracts, make sure you put the effort into making sure your contracts speak to all these issues so that when a problem happens, you've got somewhere to go. Three, use your consultant experts and use that as a basis for shopping for your consultants, because they are going to be the ones to support you when there's a problem. Four, always update your best practices, including your downtime contingency plans, with an aim to being self-sufficient if there's a problem. And then five, it all comes down to end user behavior and making sure people are practicing good cybersecurity hygiene, and then also expanding the collaboration and, again, disseminating best practices throughout your organization. All right, so questions from the audience. Graham, are you going to queue those up, or do I need to go to that page and read them? How are we doing?
Absolutely going to queue those up. Thank you very much, Dr. Wack. What a great discussion, and thank you, Jackie, Catherine, and Brian. We do have several questions because even if we're not in healthcare, of course, as consumers of healthcare services, we all have a vested interest in this topic, and you'll see that in some of these questions. So the first question that I'll present to the panel is, what can I do as a user of healthcare to protect my information? And this participant further asks, should I ask about the data security practices of the medical institution? Are there standards that they should be following? So that's a three-part question, and I'll offer that to whoever wants to answer first.
Well, I can start us off. I would say that we all have to take care of that data. The government has many standards out there for privacy and PHI, and we are all required to meet those standards. We have yearly evaluations that are required to be certified to meet those. They're pretty extensive out there if somebody wanted to go look at them. But as a healthcare, as a person receiving that, what you can do is protect your passwords and your sign-ons. Don't use the same ones that you use for everything. Get a password keeper. Keep them different, because if someone gets into Target and gets your sign-in, you don't want them being able to also get to everything else that you have. So being very, very aware of those kinds of things. There's also insurance out there that you can get yourself to look in. But, being careful yourself with your passwords and your sign-ons. If there's anything that comes up, make sure that you change those passwords, and be careful what you're using on your own devices. Keep the patching up to date on your own computers, those kinds of things. Patching is very important out there. So I'll leave that at.
Great, thank you. Anyone else have thoughts about that question?
Sure. I would also remind everyone to be as well informed as possible, right? As much information that you can get to learn and understand what securities exist to protect your health information. And that, we all hear HIPAA, and to a lot of people that means it's the barrier that I have to sign a piece of paper to say who else can, hear my test result, right? Well, every provider, to Jackie's point, is required to share with you in the form of a notice of the privacy practices that they perform. And you have actually seen and signed this every time you've seen a provider, a doctor's office, urgent care, a hospital, anywhere. So read the fine print. There are a lot of regulatory requirements for safety, and there is a lot that goes on behind the scenes in the industry, as Jackie mentioned, that a lot of consumers, I find, don't know about. Lots of security auditing, evaluations, regular sharing of information on breaches, etc. So a lot of that information to make you feel understanding and able to be certain, more certain, that your information is secure would be in that HIPAA notice of privacy practices. And the other thing I will say is that almost everyone now, and there's some requirements out there for you as a consumer, back to the question of who owns that information, I do. As a consumer, it is mine. There are health systems that provide custody of that information for me, but now the remedy for you to best understand your data, to Jackie's point, be secure and log into your patient portal and look at that information. But by the way, you can download that and actually keep a copy of your own information that you do own. And I understand that from a lot of people, my own personal perspective as well, I sort of feel like I'm protecting my information if I have a copy of it myself. So I would encourage others to do that as well.
Great. Thank you. Thank you both. We have several questions. I'm going to jump to this next question. What are your thoughts on recent identified threats from Russia related to healthcare information disruptions?
We responded very quickly. Again, I think the collaboration with the FBI, Homeland Security, giving information to the healthcare was tremendous. It is a great place to be in with that kind of collaboration. I think that, again, the protections are to make sure that your patching's up to date. You don't have anything front facing that somebody can get in. And I will tell you that we do this every day, every single day. We worry about a threat coming in. One of the things that we did do was listen to some of the recommendations given to us. Most of us cut back on email. A lot of phishing threats were out there. So some of us, we cut out like Gmail coming in or, any of those kinds of off things. You had to make very good decisions for keeping the ability for staff and internal communications going and what you were going to block. Because we do a tremendous amount of communications with our government, with COVID going on, with the state and reporting. So we've had to make very quick and careful decisions for what that is. So I think we responded very quickly, and the collaboration is great, and none of us have left up on that. And again, every day we check to see, are we ready if we get an attack?
Great. Thank you, Jackie.
Thank you. Yes, and we are actually only have 3 minutes left. So perhaps, Robert, we could throw it back to you to kind of close us out and thank your panel for us.
Certainly. So as I said, in the summary, lots of questions, a few answers, but it's a very complicated, rapidly evolving landscape. And I think our panelists here have given us some outstanding insights into the complexities and as well as where to go to find answers for businesses who are confronting this. And lots of resources out there, but you got to know where to look. And best practices and contracts, I think, are a very, very important component of this. One more time, thank you very much, you guys, for making the time to participate in this. And we'll be, I think we're on a break next and then on to our next keynote speaker. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Dr. Wack. Am I still hot? Thank you, Dr. Wack. We are taking a 5-minute break now. When we come back, we will have our first trivia battle. You get the chance to win some great prizes from some of our sponsors. The topic will be cybersecurity. So again, when you come back, go to magic.cnf.io, click on the trivia battle, log in, and you can do that while you're waiting on the break. Otherwise, go stretch your legs and come right on back. We'll see you here in 5 minutes.
See you shortly.